There have been times in the winter when I've regretted being a vet, and this looked like one of them. I had driven about 10 miles from home, thinking all the time that the dales were always looked their coldest, not when they were covered with snow, but as now, when the first sprinkling streaked the bare flanks of the fells and bars of black and white like the ribs of a crouching beast. And now in front of me was a farm gate rattling on its hinges as the wind shook it. The car, heaterless and draughty as it was, seemed like a haven in an uncharitable world, and I gripped the wheel tightly with my woolen-gloved hands for a few moments before opening the door. The wind almost tore the handle from my fingers as I got out, but I managed to crash the door shut before stumbling over the frozen mud to the gate. Muffled as I was in heavy coat and scarf pulled up to my ears, I could feel the icy gusts biting at my face, whipping up my nose and hammering painfully into the air sacs in my head. I had driven through and, streaming-eyed, was about to get back into the car when I noticed something unusual. There was a frozen pond just off the path, and among the rime-covered rushes which fringed the dead opacity of the surface of a small object stood out, shiny and black. I went over and looked closer. It was a tiny kitten, probably about 6 weeks old, huddled and immobile, eyes tightly closed. Bending down, I poked gently at the furry body. It must be dead. A morsel like this couldn't possibly survive in such cold. But no, there was a spark of life beneath the mouth, opened suddenly for a second, then closed. Quickly, I lifted the little creature and tucked it into my coat. As I drove into the farmyard, I called to the farmer, who was carrying 2 buckets out of the calf house. "I've got one of your kittens here, Mr. Butler. It must have strayed outside." Mr. Butler put down the buckets and looked blank. "Kitten? We haven't got no kittens at present." I showed him my find, and he looked more puzzled. "Well, that's a rum un. There's no black cats on the spot. We've got all sorts of colors, but no black ones." "Well, he must have come from somewhere else," I said, "though I can't imagine anything so small traveling very far. It's rather mysterious." I held the kitten out, and he engulfed it with his big, work-roughened hand. "Poor little beggar, he's only just alive. I'll take him to the house and see if the missus can do anything for him." In the farm kitchen, Mrs. Butler was all concern. "Oh, what a shame!" She smoothed back the bedraggled hair with one finger. "And it's got such a pretty face." She looked up at me. "What is it, anyway? A him or a her?" I took a quick look. "It's a Tom." "Right," she said. "I'll get some warm milk into him, but first of all, we'll give him the old cure." She went over the fireside oven on the big black kitchen range, opened the door, and popped him inside. I smiled. It was the classical procedure when newborn lambs were found suffering from cold and exposure. Into the oven they went, and the results were often dramatic. Mrs. Butler left the door partly open, and I could just see the little black figure inside. He didn't seem to care much what was happening to him. Ooh. Cow. What's he doing, the cow? Probably milking him. Little kitty. The next hour I spent in the byre, wrestling with the hind feet of a cow. The cleats were overgrown and grossly misshapen and upturned, causing the animal to hobble along on her heels. My job was to pare and hack away the excess horn, and my long-held opinion that the hind feet of a cow were never meant to be handled by a man was thoroughly confirmed. We had a rope around the hog, and the leg pulled up over a beam in the roof, but the leg still pistoned back and forth while I hung on till my teeth rattled. By the time I had finished, the sweat running into my eyes, and I had quite forgotten the cold day outside. Still, I thought, as I eased the kinks from my spine, when I had finished, there were compensations. There was a satisfaction in the sight of the cow standing comfortably on 2 almost normal-looking feet. "Well, that's something like," Mr. Butler grunted. "Come into the house and wash your hands." So I guess he wasn't milking the cow. He was trimming his feet. In the kitchen, as I bent over the brown earthenware sink, I kept glancing across the oven. Mrs. Butler laughed. "Oh, he's still with us. Come and have a look." It was difficult to see the kitten in the dark interior, but when I spotted him, I put out my hand and touched him, and he turned his head towards me. "He's coming around," I said. "That hour in there has worked wonders. Doesn't often fail." The farmer's wife lifted him out. "I think he's a little tough one." She began to spoon warm milk into the tiny mouth. "I reckon we'll have him lapping in a day or two." "You're going to keep him then?" "Too true we are. I'm going to call him Moses." "Moses? Yeah, you found him among the bushes, didn't you?" I laughed. "That's right. It's a good name." I was on the Butler farm about a fortnight later, and I kept looking around for Moses. Farmers rarely have their cats indoors, and I thought that if the black kitten had survived, he would have joined the feline colony around the buildings. Farm cats have a pretty good time. They may not be petted or cosseted, but it has always seemed to me that they led a free, natural life. They are expected to catch mice, but if they are not so inclined, there is abundant food at hand, bowls of milk here and there, and the dog's dishes to be raided if anything interesting is left over. I'd seen plenty of cats around here today, some flitting nervously away, others friendly and purring. There was a tabby loping gracefully across the cobbles, and a big tortoiseshell was curled on a bed of straw at the warm end of the byre. Cats are connoisseurs of comfort. When Mr. Butler went to fetch some hot water, I had a quick look in the bullock house, and a white Tom regarded me placidly from between the bars of a hay rack where he had been taking a siesta. But there was no sign of Moses. I finished drying my arms and was about to make a casual reference to the kitten when Mr. Butler handed me my jacket. "Come around here with me if you've got a minute," he said. "I've got something to show you." I followed him through the door at the end and across a passage into the long, low-roofed piggery. He stopped at a pen about halfway down and pointed inside. "Look here," he said. I leaned over the wall, and my face must have shown my astonishment, because the farmer burst into a shout of laughter. "That's something new for you, isn't it?" "Oh, I spy something that doesn't belong." "Who do you think that is?" "The kitten." I stared unbelievably down at the large sow stretched comfortably on her side, suckling a litter of about 12 piglets, and right in the middle of the long pink row, furry, black, and incongruous, was Moses. He had a teat in his mouth and was absorbing his nourishment with the same rapt enjoyment as his smooth-skinned fellows on either side. "What in the devil?" I gasped. Mr. Butler was still laughing. "I thought you never had seen anything like that before." "I never have, any road." "But how did that happen?" I still couldn't drag my eyes away. "It was the missus' idea," he replied. "When she'd got the little youth lapping milk, she took him out to find a warm spot for him in the buildings. She settled on this pen because the sow, Bertha, just had the litter, and I had a heater in, and it was grand and cozy." I nodded. "Sounds just right." "Well, she put Moses and a bowl of milk in here," the farmer went on, "but the little feller didn't stay by the heater very long. Next time I looked, he was round at the milk bar." I shrugged my shoulders. They say you see something new every day at this game, but this is something I've never even heard of. Anyway, he looks well on it. Does he actually live on the sow's milk, or does he still drink from his bowl? A bit of both, I reckon. It's hard to say. Anyway, whatever mixture Moses was getting, he grew rapidly into a sleek, handsome animal with an unusually high gloss to his coat, which may or may not have been due to the porcine element of his diet. I never went to the Butlers without having a look in the pig pen. Bertha, his foster mother, seemed to find nothing unusual in this hairy intruder and pushed him around casually with pleased grunts, and just as she did with the rest of her brood. Moses, for his part, appeared to find society of the pigs very congenial. When the triplets curled up together and settled down for a sleep, Moses would be somewhere in the heap, and when his young colleagues were weaned at 8 weeks, he showed his attachment to Bertha by spending most of his time with her. stayed that way over the years. Often he would be right inside the pen, rubbing himself happily along the comforting bulk of the sew, but I remember him best in his favorite place, crouching on the wall, looking down perhaps meditatively on what had been his first warm home. The end.
Okay, so here is a cool kitten cutout activity that I found that you guys can print off. Color, paint, cut out, glue together, all of the fun things. And since this book talked about a kitten, I wanted to introduce you guys to my kitties that are home. So first up is Scout. He's the oldest, the man of the house. As you can see, he puts up with a lot and he is such a snuggle bug. Here is Mr. Scout right now, just kind of laying on my bed, looking beautiful, looking cute. Yes. Next we have Tucker. He is our second oldest. Very skittish at first, but he loves hiding under blankets. So here's Mr. Tucker right now, our big boy. He's very fluffy, and you might think that he's not fat. He's only fluffy, but no, he is both fluffy and fat. Aren't you, pretty boy? This is our youngest, Miss Kitty. We call her that because when we found her in a bush somewhere while we're walking. My sister found her, and at that point we had 3 other cats and 4 kids and a fish in a small townhouse, and my mom was like, no way are we keeping this cat, so she refused to let us name her. I guess that worked out really well because Miss Kitty just stuck, and we've had her for probably the past 8 or 9 years. Aren't you so sweet? You won our hearts over. Yes.